Good afternoon. It's me. I thought I'd talk a little bit for this transmission. It's a beautiful day, one of the first beautiful days of the year, really, in Berlin. And I'm in my studio. I can see trees, sky, river, tourists on boats coming back. Life starting up again. I want to talk a bit about modular synthesis, which is the main thing that I do these days. Although I've done quite a lot of other things. Maybe it's worth talking about that sometime. But originally actually, I was playing Korg MS-20. Managed to get hold of one of those when I was about 18. And never really understood it, but it's a fascinating instrument, and that got me into synthesis. But then shortly after that, I started listening to Ornette Coleman and this kind of music, and I thought I should learn to play a proper instrument. So after trying violin and some other things, I settled on the saxophone and was playing saxophone for about 15 years. And I don't know. Some part of me always felt like the saxophone belonged to someone else, to other musicians, to other traditions. Particularly jazz. And there were so many geniuses that played saxophone in the 20th century. I don't know, young guy coming in, young English guy trying to make something with that. Okay, some people do. Of course, there's lots of great European saxophone players, but I always felt like this instrument wasn't really mine, and that I just wasn't that kind of musician. However, that gave me a musical education, which I hadn't really had before. And although in many ways I haven't used that education directly, I studied jazz harmony and basic composition and arrangement, and I tend not to use that information, but to learn it, to go through it, to learn the precision, firstly took a bit of guilt away from me. Like, am I not playing this kind of music because I'm afraid to play it, or am I afraid of learning the skills? I'm afraid I don't have the skills. Or is it something else? So anyway, I went through it. I had lessons with guy called Elton Dean, who played in Soft Machine and was a great fiery player on alto and soprano saxophone, and also later with Steve Lacy, who's pretty much universally regarded as a master of the soprano saxophone. And it was, great to meet your teacher, meet your hero. In a way, it was very disappointing. I don't think we got on particularly well. But I had some lessons with him, and he taught me the essence of what I used to play saxophone for many years. Why am I talking about saxophone? Well, thinking about modular synthesizers, there's a question as to how far it's an instrument or not. Like, is it an instrument or is it something else? Is it a studio? Like, this is EMS Synthi from, 1971, 1972. The first really portable commercial synthesizer made in England. EMS, Electronic Music Studios, was the company, but I think this was also regarded as an electronic music studio. It brought together a lot of functions that had been separate, like the oscillators. You would buy a separate oscillator unit. A lot of people are getting into buying these old these old test equipment these days. It's kind of interesting. Sonically, it's very interesting. In terms of CV control, what you can actually do with it is less interesting. More for drones or basic primitive kind of rhythms, but it's a thing people have got into through getting into modular synthesis and getting used to this idea. They've gone back to older equipment. And I've played about with that in the studios in Sonology in the Hague as well. It's interesting stuff. But the idea of this instrument is that it will put a lot of those together in one box. This idea comes not from Robert Moog, but from Harold Bode, or Bode, who I think 1961 published his article about voltage control synthesis, and he also built an electronic music studio himself, which had a built-in tape recorder. And in many ways, it's like a precursor of the digital audio workstation today. So this idea, like the synthesizers from Moog, from Buchla, from Serge, these kind of early geniuses, they all owe a debt to what Bode did. I really should find out if it's Bode or Bode. I've heard both. I would say Bode, but it's probably not right. So Peter Zinoviev, who was amongst other people who put this synthesizer together, at the time it was an amazing thing to do, and actually it still is an amazing thing. In some ways it's unparalleled machine, this, in terms of its sonic character and certain animal abilities. He calls it a pathetic little synthesizer, which I haven't met him, but if I do, I have to take him up on that because he's so wrong. So this was intended to be a portable synthesizer, and it's all in one. It has many characteristics of a modular synthesizer, especially with the patch bay, meaning you can connect different modules together. You can use one module to modulate another. But it's not really a fully fledged modular synthesizer in the way that this Serge is. You can't get more modular than this. It's on the way to being a kind of analog computer or analog test equipment, while still having the kind of discrete collections of individual functions. It also has modules where those functions are brought together into a filter or a slope generator or random generator, so on. I don't want to talk about the Serge today. This idea of being an analog computer is an interesting model for what analog modular synthesizers are. Rob Hoordijk, who made this wonderful machine that I don't think you can quite see, I'll talk about it another day, he calls this machine an analog computer. We call them synthesizers, but it's not really a synthesizer. A synthesizer is a more specific idea about synthesizing these functions and giving them a particular kind of organization. The interesting thing about this kind of instrument and this kind of instrument is it synthesizes these functions together, but it leaves the organization of them up to you. So another thing that Rob Hoordijk says that's influenced me or inspired me is that modular synthesis is not about modules. And in this world of especially of Eurorack, a lot of people coming into modular synthesis perhaps not knowing so much about it, there's an assumption that what matters is the module. This is a great filter, this is a great oscillator, this is a great random generator, this is a great wave shaper. Not true. It's not what's important. It's a misunderstanding. And of course it's a misunderstanding that people in the game, they have some interest in pursuing that. But it isn't the thing, really. Another day I'll talk about the modules that I use in my performing system, which is the system I've made most of the videos on so far in this series. And there, I think it's clear that many of the modules I use could be replaced with other modules. It's not about the character of this, the character of that. What it's about, and what this system gets so right, and what actually this system gets so right and this system gets so right, is bringing together a collection of functions. I'm going to repeat it. It's not about modules, it's about functions. So returning to my original question, is this an instrument? The answer is no. It's a collection of functions. When it's patched together, you can make an instrument out of it. And the instruments you make, whether on this system, this system, this system, blah, 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 what you make is depending on what you want to do. And there's some different models for that. And that's really what I'd like to talk about today. The instrumental model is one model of what a synthesizer could be. And it assumes, I think an instrument assumes kind of a single line, a way of controlling it, and the most obvious, most widely known modular instrument that was created at the same time as this is the Moog Mini Moog. Because, why? Because Robert Moog put a keyboard on it. He basically turned a modular synthesizer into a home organ. Shock, shock. Of course, it sounds great. I'm not arguing with this instrument. But the interface is completely conventional. And one reason Moog was successful, reasonably successful commercially, and other synthesizer manufacturers of the time weren't, is that by giving them the keyboard, he enabled someone like Keith Emerson with, had basic classical rock and roll keyboard skills in order to embrace this new sound world without doing what someone like Morton Subotnick did, which was completely recreate a compositional process around the existence of the Buchla modular. Rock and roll musicians didn't want to do that. They just wanted to play. So sticking a keyboard on it opened up the Moog, opened up synthesizer, opened up electronic music to funk, to rock and roll, to all these, to jazz, to all these other kinds of music. It was a good move. For the history of the synthesizer, it was a bit of a duff move, because after that, synthesizers became regarded as keyboard instruments. And if you look around my studio, there is a sort of keyboard, but it's not what I'm interested in with these instruments, and it's not how I'm interested in controlling these instruments. But it can be an instrument. The other model, which I've already alluded to, is that it is an analog computer. When I say computer, I don't just mean zeros and ones. Yes, it is doing that. Square waves are basically zeros and ones. But sine wave or other kinds of fluctuating wave are not zeros and ones. They're continuous waveforms, which can also be added, multiplied, computed, can be put to, I meant to say combined rather than computed, and can be used in a whole number of different ways. So when we say analog computer, we don't mean a parallel with a digital computer. We mean something a little bit more than that. Of course, digital computers have something else. They have memory. They're not useless. But as instruments, the analog computer has particular fascination and a particular kind of liveliness. So we have two models, the instrument, the studio. There's also, the instrument and the analog computer. There's also something kind of between those, which I would say is an interactive instrument. And this opens up the possibility for something I do a lot, which is using random generators to generate material and then responding to that live. And my Eurorack system, the Surge system, this EMS Synthi, and the Hordijk system, and the other instrument I have, the other major instrument is Oberheim Matrix. All of these are very, very good at creating generative streams of information that you can respond to create a performance. So whether you're using the knobs or this kind of patch bay or patch leads, or whether you're using sensors or contact mics or sticking something in your brain to create a voltage to interact with these instruments, there's a lot of different interactive aspects. And the interactive aspect is somewhere between the instrumental aspect, and the computer aspect. The fourth aspect, which I think is worth mentioning, because it's really related to what I'm doing. If you watched any of the 3 live videos, performance videos that I've put out, there's a particular approach to that. I mean, there's sampling in it, so some people might say, well, that's not even modular synthesis, which would be wrong. But the point of that is to create a number of streams of information, or to divide up a stream of information into parts which can create conversations with each other. So then it gets, and this is what I think of as an ensemble approach. This word actually came from Joseph Hyde. He uses the term to describe his work with analog synthesizers and controlled by computer. And I think it's a very useful concept because it's different from the other concept. With an ensemble, it's kind of a one-man band. In one extreme, it's a one-man band. You're creating these different streams. You can hear someone like, predictably I've forgotten his name. I'm not going to remember, am I? Dutch dude. I'll come back to that. I'll maybe put the name on the list. Where maybe one instrument's a drum, the other's a bass, there's a lead, perhaps a couple of rhythm parts, and you have effects. And you basically use the modular synthesizer in the same way as you would have used MIDI modules in the old days, or in the same way as you might use something like Ableton Live now. So that's one aspect of the ensemble approach. Another aspect, which is more how I do it, is to take a stream of information, by which I'm talking about control voltage, and split that stream up into various different quasi voices, which can interact with each other either directly, like they could frequency modulate each other, so your lead sound could be directly affecting your bass sound, or more creating a kind of dialogue by, well, there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's some quite clever ways to divide up frequencies and send them out to different directions. So you could take one stream of MIDI information or voltage information and create multiple voices from it. And this, and then the player is really then coordinating the relationship of these voices, deciding, okay, do we hear one thing, and what is that, and then how do we interact with that one thing, or do we hear 8 things, and then how do we control 8 things? So these poles, when we're talking about an ensemble approach, I would say are measured by, it could be interaction, or how you deal with all this information could be pre-programmed. But what I want to say is that the amount of interaction between these voices brings up another concept, and this is the last concept I want to discuss in this little presentation, and that's that of morphology. And the idea of morphology, well, it has many backgrounds in the plastic arts or Dennis Smalley's concept of spectrum morphology. But in the terms of synthesis, I know this concept of morphology through the Nord Modular, which is a wonderful digital synthesizer, which is really kind of what got me into all of this again after the saxophone period. And a morph is quite simple. You take one knob and then you can send it out to various different destinations, and then you could have an index for each of those destinations that would determine how much of that morph gesture will go to the destination. So you could also perhaps invert that information, which means you can do interesting things like panning or changing the phase of things, changing phase relationships between different events. So if I take this one knob, I can send it to literally every aspect of the synthesizer. This is modular. I can send it to every aspect of all the synthesizers in the room. So I might morph this one gesture, this morph. I do this. The tempo might increase. The pitch might increase. The filter might open. I might have something else more interesting. I might have a voltage control divider that I'm controlling. That could be inverse. So the higher the voltage I'm sending, the more I open the knob, the slower the tempo gets. And you could have all of these events happening and have different amounts of all of them. And of course, it doesn't need to be a knob. It could be something like a low frequency oscillator or a sequencer. So all of these morphs are semi-programmed or completely programmed. So with this ensemble approach, which is mostly what I use, and it's more a way of thinking than anything else. It's not like this is a system. It's like, how do I think about patching? How do I think about interacting with these objects? The morphology approach is particularly interesting because it can include the instrumental, the interactive, the gestural aspect, like me and my body, and along with the analog computer aspect and the more chaotic, the more using sample and holds or using generators, generative tools. It can include, if you want it to, you can take it all down to a solo voice, but you can also include an ensemble approach where perhaps you're interacting with 8 different voices, which is typically what I'm doing live, and you're interacting with a random voltage, which you might be predictable, might be less predictable, depending how you do it. But there's also morphological relationships between the different voltages you have going. You can have one core voltage, but it's having a different effect and different amounts of effect on all these different 8 voices. Plus, the voices themselves as audio could also be cross-modulating each other. So you quickly have an ensemble of events where you are in some way the conductor and in some way not. And this is something I find very interesting, and this is very much what I'm doing live and very much what I'm doing in the studio. And it has both a compositional aspect, the patching, the organizing is very much compositional, and has an improvisational aspect. And one reason I prefer this stuff to playing the saxophone is that even though the saxophone is, almost the most famous instrument for improvisation, or certainly one of the core ones in the 20th century, it only works if you blow down it. Of course, you don't know exactly what comes out, but you basically know what comes out. You know what you're trying to do. And this has that quality to some extent, but it also has a different quality, which is you cannot really know. And you have to keep engaged. So this ensemble approach in particular is always challenging me. It's asking me, how much can you hear? How much do you know what's going on? How do you decide what event is core right now? What do we have to focus on now? When do we need to change something? What is this boring? And as I said, some of these questions are exactly the same as playing other instruments, but some of them aren't. They're a little bit more related to the animal quality of the instruments. And animal quality, this anthropomorphism, of course it's something I'm imposing on the instruments. But when you actually work with them, it's very helpful to think of them as having animal qualities, of having sentient qualities, of making decisions that are often more interesting than what I might be trying to do. I might have a musical idea, I might be trying to realize it, I might succeed, I might fail, but everything I discover on the way to trying to realize it might be more interesting than the thing I'm doing. So that's the last thing I would like to well, I'd like to leave you with two ideas. Perhaps I'll take these up again in future. One is that this instrument, is a tool for listening. It's a way of hearing. It's helping you to listen. It's helping you to listen to the world. It's helping you to be a better listener. Actually, it's helping you to be a better person, because you have to go beyond your ideas to work with these instruments. You can't limit yourself to what you think you want to hear or what you think you want to do. There's always so many different capabilities and possibilities that they are throwing you every second. You have to keep awake and not be the person who thinks they're an expert. I mean, you can do that, but you can make very boring music that way. These instruments are a tool for hearing. And the final idea that I want to leave you with is whatever I'm playing, whichever of these instruments, whether I'm playing live or in the studio, whether I'm playing with a group of jazz musicians or whether I'm playing a solo, it's always a duet. And that feels to me very different from playing a solo instrument. That it's always an ensemble. I'm part of the ensemble. It's a combination of flesh, listening, electronics, sound. It's a combination of these things always. So I think that's it. I think that's what I wanted to say. Yeah. Thank you for listening in. I hope this has been interesting. It's probably quite evident that I didn't plan this. And I remembered the ensemble person's name, which is Colin Benders, who is very much having like separate modules as separate instruments. And then he's kind of performing this whole kind of techno orchestra kind of thing. So that means I don't need to put any notes in, which is great. Thank you for listening. Over and out.